A single, frantic text message changed Chloe's life forever. Hiding in her bathroom, terrified, and nursing a shattered wrist, she texted her mother for help, but the reply she received wasn't from her mom. It was from the city's most feared syndicate boss, and he was already downstairs. The rain lashed against the bedroom window of apartment 3B, a rhythmic drumming that completely failed to drown out the sound of Derek's screaming. Chloe Hastings backed away, her hands raised in a placating gesture, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. It had started over nothing. A misplaced set of car keys, a dinner that was 10 minutes too late, a perceived slight in her tone. It didn't matter what the catalyst was anymore. With Derek Stanton, the explosion was always the same, inevitably violent and suffocatingly sudden. I didn't mean to move them. Derek, I swear, Chloe pleaded, her voice trembling. I just wiped down the counter. You never listen, he roared, his face flushed a mottled, ugly red, the veins in his neck bulging against his collar. He closed the distance between them in 2 long strides. Chloe turned to bolt for the hallway. But she wasn't fast enough. Derek's heavy hand clamped down on her left forearm. The grip was ironclad, bruising her skin instantly. She panicked, planting her feet and yanking her arm back with all the strength she could muster in a desperate bid for freedom. Derek didn't let go. Instead, he twisted. A sickening, wet snap echoed in the small bedroom. For a fraction of a second, Chloe didn't feel anything. Then, a wave of agony so intense it whited out her vision crashed over her. A jagged scream tore from her throat as she collapsed to her knees, clutching her arm to her chest. Her forearm was bent at an impossible, unnatural angle. Derek staggered back, his chest heaving, staring at her deformed arm with a mixture of shock and sudden, self-serving panic. Look what you made me do, he stammered, pointing a shaking finger at her. If you had just stood still, taking advantage of his momentary hesitation, Chloe scrambled to her feet, blinded by tears and dizzy with pain. She threw herself into the adjoining master bathroom and slammed the door shut, throwing the deadbolt with her good hand, just as Derek's heavy weight slammed against the wood from the outside. Chloe, open this door, he bellowed, the doorknob rattling violently. Open the damn door, or I'll kick it off its hinges. We need to get our story straight before we go to the hospital. She knew what that meant. I fell down the stairs. I tripped over the rug. I was clumsy. She couldn't do it again. Not this time. Slumping against the cold tile of the bathtub, Chloe fumbled in her pocket and pulled out her phone. Her vision was swimming, black spots dancing at the edges of her sight. The pain was making her nauseous. Her fingers, slick with cold sweat, trembled uncontrollably as she unlocked the screen. She needed her mother. Barbara lived only 10 minutes away in the suburban outskirts of the city. She had just gotten a new phone number 2 days ago, and Chloe hadn't saved it to her contacts yet. She forced herself to focus, visualizing the 10 digits her mother had jotted down on a sticky note. 3, 1, 2, 5, 5, 5, 0, 1, 9, 8. Her thumb shook violently as she tapped out the message. Mom, please come. Derek went crazy. He broke my arm. Locked in the bathroom. Pels, hurry. 424 Maple Street. Apt 3B. So scared. She hit send. The message bubbled up on the screen. A tiny blue beacon of hope. She dropped the phone onto the bath mat, cradling her broken arm against her chest, sobbing quietly as Derek continued to kick at the door. The wood splintered slightly with every impact. He was going to get in. It was only a matter of time. Ding. Chloe gasped, lunging for the phone. Her mother had replied. Thank God. She squinted at the bright screen, but the words didn't make sense. The text wasn't from her mother. The syntax was wrong. The tone was completely alien. The reply read, "Who is this? Give me 5 minutes. I'm on my way." Chloe's blood ran cold, freezing the marrow in her bones. She stared at the phone number at the top of the screen. 3, 1, 2, 5, 5, 5. Ling Yi Baba. In her pain-addled panic, her trembling thumb had hit the 8 instead of the 9. She had sent her desperate plea, her address, and her vulnerability to a complete stranger. "Oh God," she whispered, a fresh wave of despair washing over her. "No, no, no, no." She frantically typed back with her one good hand. "I'm so sorry. Wrong number. Please ignore." The delivered receipt appeared beneath her message. A moment later, 3 little grey dots popped up, indicating the stranger was typing, "I don't ignore women with broken arms. I am 2 blocks away. Stay away from the door." Chloe stared at the screen, paralyzed. Stay away from the door? Who was this person? A cop? A psycho? A vigilante? Outside the bathroom, Derek let out a guttural scream of frustration and slammed his shoulder into the door. The top hinge gave way with a loud crack, the wood splintering inward. "I'm coming in, Chloe," Derek yelled, his voice laced with venom, "and you're going to regret making me do this." She squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the door to give way, waiting for the nightmare to continue. But the stranger's message echoed in her mind. "Give me 5 minutes." 4 minutes had already passed. The bathroom door shuddered violently. Derek had retrieved something heavy from the bedroom, maybe a chair or his steel-toed boots, and was methodically battering the bottom half of the door. "You think you can hide from me?" Derek sneered, his breath hitching with exertion. "You're pathetic." Chloe pushed herself backward until her spine hit the porcelain of the bathtub. She was trapped. Her arm throbbed with a sickening, rhythmic pulse that synced with her racing heartbeat. She squeezed her phone so tightly her knuckles turned white, staring at the strange number on the screen. Then, abruptly, the relentless pounding on her door stopped. Through the thin drywall, Chloe heard the unmistakable sound of the apartment's front doorbell chiming. Once, twice, a polite, almost businesslike sound. Derek paused, muttering a string of violent curses. "Keep your mouth shut," he hissed through the splintered gap in the bathroom door. "If you make a sound, I swear to God." Chloe held her breath, listening to Derek's heavy footsteps stomp out of the bedroom and down the short hallway to the front door. She heard the click of the deadbolt sliding back, followed by the squeak of the hinges. "Yeah? What do you want?" Derek snapped, his voice adopting that aggressive, puffed-up bravado he used whenever he felt challenged by another man. "We didn't order anything, and we're busy." There was a brief silence. When the response came, the voice was a low, resonant baritone. It was calm, lethally calm. It sounded like gravel wrapped in velvet, slicing effortlessly through Derek's aggressive posturing. "Are you Derek?" the voice asked. It didn't sound like a question. It sounded like an indictment. "Who's asking?" Derek shot back, though Chloe could hear a slight tremor of uncertainty creeping into his tone. "My name is Dominic Corvino," the man said smoothly. "And you are currently occupying oxygen in a very offensive manner." Chloe gasped softly. Dominic Corvino. Even in her sheltered, controlled life with Derek, she recognized that name. Everyone in the city knew that name. He wasn't a police officer. He wasn't a vigilante. He was the head of the Corvino Syndicate, a man who controlled the city's docks, its underground casinos, and, according to the evening news, the local politicians. He was a ghost, a myth, a monster in a bespoke suit. And she had accidentally texted him, "I don't know who you think you are, pal, but you need to back the hell up and get out of my doorway," Derek stammered, clearly trying to maintain his alpha facade while rapidly losing ground. "I'm calling the cops." "Silas," Dominic said, his voice entirely unbothered. "Please educate Mr. Stanton on the consequences of raising his voice." What happened next was so fast, Chloe couldn't fully process the sounds. There was a dull thwack, a sharp intake of breath, and then the heavy, unceremonious thud of 200 pounds of dead weight hitting the hardwood floor. Derek didn't even have time to scream. There was a sickening sound of something breaking a nose, perhaps a jaw followed by a low, pathetic groaning. "Tie him up. Duct tape the mouth. If he bleeds on the rug, it's fine. It's cheap," Dominic instructed. His footsteps moving slowly, deliberately, down the hallway toward the bedroom. Chloe's heart stopped. She heard the heavy tread of leather shoes entering the room. They stopped right outside the shattered bathroom door. "Chloe?" The voice was close now, deep, resonant, and surprisingly gentle. She couldn't speak. Her throat felt tight with terror. "Chloe, my name is Dominic. I am the man you texted," he said, his voice dropping an octave to soothe her. "The man who hurt you is currently incapacitated in the living room. You are safe. I need you to unlock the door." With a trembling hand, she reached up and fumbled with the deadbolt. It clicked open. The door was gently pushed open the rest of the way. Chloe shrank back against the bathtub, looking up through tear-blurred eyes. Dominic Corvino stood in the doorway. He was tall, impeccably dressed in a dark charcoal suit that looked perfectly tailored to his broad shoulders. His dark hair was neatly styled, but it was his eyes that struck her. They were a piercing, stormy grey, scanning the bathroom with a tactical precision before finally landing on her. When he saw her, huddled on the floor, cradling her mangled arm, a dangerous, terrifying shadow crossed his face. For a split second, the polished Mafia boss vanished, replaced by a predator looking at a wounded lamb. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. He crouched down slowly, taking care not to make any sudden movements, resting his forearms on his knees. "You sent the message," he stated softly, his eyes locking onto hers. I missed a number," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I was trying to reach my mother. Fate has a funny way of rerouting distress signals," Dominic murmured. He extended a large, impeccably manicured hand toward her. "Can you walk?" "My arm," she sobbed, the adrenaline wearing off, leaving only the searing agony. "I know. We aren't going to a hospital. They ask too many questions, and I prefer discretion," he said, standing up and effortlessly pulling her to her feet with his other hand, careful not to jostle her left side. "I have a private physician. He is the best in the city. He will fix your arm, and he will give you something for the pain." As he guided her out of the bathroom, Chloe caught a glimpse of the living room. Derek was bound tightly with zip ties, a strip of silver duct tape plastered across his bleeding mouth. Standing over him was a massive man with a scarred face, Silas, she assumed, who looked at Derek with absolute disgust. Dominic didn't even spare Derek a glance as he led Chloe toward the front door. What are you going to do to him?" Chloe asked, her voice trembling as she looked up at the syndicate boss. Dominic paused in the doorway, the city lights reflecting in his cold grey eyes. He looked down at her, his expression unreadable. "You don't need to worry about Derek anymore, Chloe," Dominic said softly, pulling his dark cashmere overcoat from his arm and draping it gently over her shivering shoulders. "Derek has just discovered that there are monsters in the world much scarier than he is. Let's go." Rain drummed a frantic rhythm against the tinted, bulletproof glass of the Maybach as it glided through the neon-slicked streets of the city. Inside the cavernous cabin, the silence was thick, broken only by Chloe's ragged breathing and the soft hum of the engine. She sat rigidly in the plush leather seat, clutching her shattered left arm to her chest. The pain was a blinding, living entity now, gnawing at her nerve endings. Dominic Corvino sat opposite her, an impenetrable silhouette in the ambient city light. He hadn't spoken since they left her apartment building, leaving Silas behind to handle the garbage. Chloe didn't know where they were going, and a small, rational part of her brain screamed that getting into a car with a known crime boss was a fatal mistake. But as she looked at his profile, stoic, composed, exuding an aura of absolute control, she realized she felt safer here than she had in her own home for the past 2 years. "We are entering the estate," Dominic said quietly, his deep voice cutting through the quiet tension. "Dr. Harrison Caldwell is waiting for us. He is discreet, highly skilled, and has been on my payroll for a decade. You don't need to explain anything to him that you don't want to." Heavy wrought iron gates, adorned with a subtle crest, swung open automatically as the vehicle approached. The car wound its way up a long, tree-lined driveway before coming to a smooth halt in front of a sprawling stone facade mansion that looked like a fortress disguised as a luxury estate. Before Chloe could attempt to open her door, Dominic was already there. Holding it open, he offered his hand again, his eyes tracking the micro-expressions of pain on her pale face. "Lean on me," he instructed. It wasn't a request. She allowed him to guide her through the heavy mahogany front doors and into a grand foyer bathed in warm, amber light. They didn't linger in the opulent living spaces. Dominic led her down a discreet hallway, an elevator ride to the basement level, and into a space that looked completely out of place in a mansion. It was a fully equipped, state-of-the-art medical facility. A tall, grey-haired man in crisp scrubs looked up from a stainless steel counter. Dr. Caldwell had kind eyes, but his demeanor was strictly professional. He didn't ask her name, and he didn't ask how the injury happened. "Let's get you on the table, miss," Dr. Caldwell said softly, pulling down an overhead surgical light. The next hour was a blur of localized anesthesia, the sterile smell of iodine, and the sickening sound of bone being manually realigned. Despite the nerve blockers, the pressure and deep ache caused tears to stream silently down Chloe's cheeks. Through it all, Dominic did not leave the room. He stood in the corner, his suit jacket discarded, his shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal dark, intricate ink winding up his forearms. Whenever Chloe whimpered, his jaw clenched so tightly she thought his teeth might shatter. "Clean break of the radius and ulna," Dr. Caldwell announced as he finished wrapping a heavy fiberglass cast around her forearm. "I've prescribed a heavy course of anti-inflammatories and painkillers. You'll need to keep it elevated. No sudden movements. Thank you, Harrison." Dominic nodded, stepping forward. He looked down at Chloe, who was exhausted, trembling, and heavily medicated. "I will take her to the guest wing." He effortlessly scooped her up into his arms, mindful of her cast. Chloe was too exhausted to protest. Her head fell against his broad chest, the scent of expensive cologne and petrichor wrapping around her like a blanket. When she woke up, sunlight was streaming through towering French windows. She was lying in a massive, 4-poster bed draped in Egyptian cotton. Her arm was propped up on a silk pillow, throbbing with a dull, manageable ache. The bedroom door clicked open, and Dominic stepped inside carrying a silver tray. He was dressed casually now, in dark slacks and a fitted black Henley that emphasized his imposing physique. "You slept for 14 hours, he said, setting the tray which held toast, eggs, and a steaming cup of tea on the bedside table. "How is the pain?" "Manageable," Chloe croaked, her throat dry. She carefully sat up against the headboard. "Dominic, I don't know how to thank you, but I can't stay here. I have to go back. I have to get my things, my laptop. Your belongings have already been retrieved," Dominic interrupted smoothly, pouring her a cup of tea. "Silas packed your essential items last night. They are in the closet." Chloe stared at him, bewildered. "What about Derek? If he goes to the police?" Dominic stopped pouring. He set the teapot down with deliberate slowness. His stormy grey eyes met hers, and the temperature in the room plummeted. "Derek Stanton will not be going to the police," Dominic said. his voice dropping to a dangerous register. In fact, Derek has much larger problems to deal with now. When you left your apartment, I had my people run a deep background check on your charming boyfriend. I don't just break bones, Chloe. I break lives. He pulled a thick manila folder from under his arm and tossed it onto the edge of the bed. Open it, he commanded softly. Chloe hesitated, then reached out with her good hand, flipping the cover open. Inside were bank statements, wire transfer receipts, and photographs of men she didn't recognize meeting in dimly lit parking garages. Derek is a mid-level accountant for Apex Holdings, Dominic explained. Leaning against the window frame, Apex Holdings is a shell corporation owned by the Romano family. The Romanos are my rivals. And your boyfriend, it seems, has been systematically embezzling from them to fund his gambling addiction. $2.5 million over the last 3 years. Chloe's breath caught in her throat. Derek had always been secretive about his finances, prone to violent outbursts when money was tight. But she had never imagined this. He's stealing from the mob, she whispered, horrified. He was. Dominic corrected. Last night, I acquired his debt from the Romanos in exchange for territorial concessions at the docks. Derek doesn't owe them anymore. He owes me. And I have very specific methods of collecting. What are you going to do? Chloe asked, her heart pounding, unsure if she was terrified of the man standing before her or completely in awe of him. I am going to give him a trial, Dominic said, a dark, lethal smile playing on his lips. And I want you to watch. 3 days melted into a surreal, quiet rhythm within the impenetrable walls of Blackwood Manor. For Chloe, the sprawling estate became a gilded sanctuary, a stark contrast to the suffocating prison her own apartment had become. She spent her mornings wandering the manicured gardens under the watchful eyes of silent security details, her broken arm a constant, dull ache bound in rigid fiberglass. Yet, beneath the physical trauma, a profound psychological shift was occurring. The paralyzing fear that had defined her existence for 2 years was slowly evaporating, replaced by an unfamiliar sense of vindication. Dominic Corvino's presence was a captivating study in absolute contrasts. During daylight hours, he was a phantom, sequestered in his heavily guarded study, conducting the violent and complex symphony of the city's underworld. But when evening fell, the ruthless syndicate boss shed his armor entirely for her. They shared quiet, lavish dinners in the cavernous dining hall, surrounded by priceless art and flickering candlelight. He never interrogated her about the abuse, but he offered a steady, grounding presence. He listened to her talk about her passion for graphic design, his stormy grey eyes tracking her every expression with a fierce, unwavering protectiveness. By the twilight of the 4th day, however, the atmospheric pressure inside Blackwood Manor shifted dramatically. The quiet hum of the sanctuary was shattered by the low growl of armored SUVs prowling up the long driveway. Heavy boots echoed on the imported marble floors of the foyer as Dominic's most trusted lieutenants assembled. Dominic found Chloe reading in the East Wing library. He wore a pristine, midnight blue 3-piece suit that fit his broad shoulders flawlessly. He looked every inch the apex predator the city feared. "It's time," he said simply, his voice a low, commanding rumble. He led her away from the opulent living quarters, guiding her to a secure elevator that descended deep into the sub-basement levels of the estate. At the end of a long, reinforced concrete corridor lay a massive, soundproofed room that Dominic utilized for high-stakes syndicate arbitration. It was a terrifying, subterranean homage to the justice system, a shadowy courtroom, where Dominic's word was absolute law, unburdened by appeals or red tape. Dark, polished oak paneled the walls, absorbing the harsh overhead light. A long, elevated mahogany table sat at the front of the room, acting as a judge's bench, flanked by heavy leather chairs. "You will stay in the observation room," Dominic instructed, guiding her to a discreet side door that opened into a small, darkened booth. A large two-way mirror dominated the front wall, overlooking the makeshift courtroom below. You have a direct audio feed. They cannot see you, and they cannot hear you. You are completely safe here, Chloe. I want you to watch. Chloe nodded, her throat tight. She sank into the plush leather chair facing the glass, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Moments later, the heavy double oak doors of the arbitration room swung outward. Silas, the hulking enforcer with the scarred face, dragged a battered, terrified Derek Stanton into the room. He threw Derek roughly into a heavy wooden chair, bolted to the concrete floor in the dead center of the room. Derek's face was swollen and heavily bruised, his left arm secured in a crude, dirty sling. His eyes darted around the imposing room like a cornered rat, wide with pure, unfiltered terror. Dominic walked in shortly after, accompanied by his consigliere, Vincent Rossi. Vincent, a sharply dressed man with dead, cold eyes, carried a thick leather briefcase. Dominic ascended the steps to the mahogany table, taking his seat at the center. He looked down at Derek with an expression of absolute, freezing contempt. Derek Stanton. Dominic's voice boomed through the speakers in Chloe's observation booth, echoing off the oak panels with terrifying authority. You stand accused of theft, massive corporate fraud, and a profound, unforgivable failure of basic human decency. I don't know what you're talking about, Derek cried out, his voice cracking violently with panic. He strained against the zip ties binding his ankles to the chair legs. I don't have any money. Just let me go, please. I swear to God, I won't go near Chloe ever again. This arbitration is no longer just about Chloe, Dominic stated, his voice devoid of any warmth. He gestured sharply to Vincent. The consigliere opened the briefcase and began laying out neat, organized stacks of banking ledgers and wire transfer receipts across the mahogany wood. Though your brutal treatment of her is what sealed your fate, your staggering arrogance is what brought you to my table tonight. Dominic picked up a single sheet of paper, holding it up under the harsh lights. Let us review your portfolio, Mr. Stanton. Cayman Islands, routing number ending in 4,409. $300,000 transferred on the 12th of August. Another $500,000 funneled through a dummy corporation in Belize last November. And countless smaller transactions washed through local shell companies over the past 3 years. Derek's face drained of all remaining color, turning a sickly, translucent gray. He slumped back against the wooden chair, the fight completely leaving his body as he realized the true magnitude of his nightmare. He hadn't just crossed paths with a random street thug, he had been audited by the devil himself. You stole exactly $2.5 million from the Romano family. Derek, Dominic continued, his eyes locked onto the trembling man like a sniper's crosshairs. You used your position at Apex Holdings to bleed them dry, to fund your gambling debts. Sal Marcano, the head of the Romano family, discovered the discrepancy yesterday. He was planning to skin you alive in a shipping container when he found you. Oh God. Derek sobbed, a pathetic, wet sound. Please, but I stepped in, Dominic said smoothly. I purchased your debt from the Romanos in exchange for territorial concessions at the southern docks. You do not owe Sal Marcano anymore. I bought your life. Why? Derek wept, tears streaming down his bruised, swollen face, mixing with dried blood. Why would you do that? Because Sal Marcano lacks imagination, Dominic replied. He stood up slowly, descending the short steps from the bench to approach Derek on the floor level. And because I believe in a very specific, absolute type of hard karma, you used your physical strength to break the arm of a woman who loved you. You did it because it made you feel powerful. You did it because you thought there would never be any consequences. Dominic stopped mere inches from Derek, his towering frame casting a long dark shadow over the weeping man. So, Witness your consequences, Dominic declared, his voice ringing with chilling finality. Vincent has already seized your domestic bank accounts. We acquired the passwords to your offshore accounts 6 hours ago. They have been completely drained. You are currently penniless. Your condo has been repossessed by a holding company I control. Your vehicle has been crushed into a cube of scrap metal. Derek gasped for air, hyperventilating, his chest heaving as his entire world was systematically vaporized. You took everything. I am not finished, Dominic whispered, leaning in close, so only Derek and Chloe through the microphone could hear. I have also forwarded a heavily redacted, perfectly curated version of these ledgers to the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. An anonymous tip regarding corporate embezzlement at Apex Holdings. A federal judge will sign the warrant for your arrest by tomorrow morning. Behind the two-way glass, Chloe covered her mouth with her good hand. The sheer, breathtaking magnitude of the trap Dominic had sprung left her speechless. He wasn't just going to hurt Derek. He was completely, legally, and financially eradicating his existence. If you run, my men will hunt you down, Dominic said, turning his back on the broken man. If you try to hide, Sal Marcano's men will find you and finish what they started. Your only option for survival is to turn yourself in to the federal authorities and spend the next 20 years in a maximum security penitentiary for wire fraud and embezzlement. If you ever breathe a single word about this room, or if you ever let Chloe's name cross your lips again, federal prison will quickly become the least of your concerns. Dominic looked up, his stormy grey eyes briefly locking onto the two-way mirror, directly meeting Chloe's gaze through the darkened glass. Silas, Dominic ordered, returning to his seat at the bench. Take Mr. Stanton and dump him on the front steps of the federal courthouse downtown. Let him make his choice. As Silas dragged the weeping, ruined shell of Derek Stanton out of the heavy oak doors, Chloe sank back into her leather chair. A profound, overwhelming wave of relief washed over her, so intense it brought fresh tears to her eyes. The monster who had terrorized her was gone, completely crushed under the weight of his own arrogance and the cold, calculated justice of the syndicate. The door to the observation booth clicked open quietly, and Dominic stepped inside. The ruthless, terrifying prosecutor vanished, replaced once again by the quiet, protective man who had carried her out of her apartment. Is it done? She asked softly, looking up at him in the dim light. He will never hurt you, or anyone else, ever again, Dominic promised, crouching down beside her chair so they were eye level. Karma always collects its debts, Chloe. Sometimes, it just needs a little push. 6 weeks slipped by in a quiet haze of healing and unexpected peace. Autumn had fully descended upon the city, painting the sprawling grounds of Blackwood Manor in brilliant shades of amber and gold. Inside the heavily guarded estate, Chloe's life had settled into a surreal, comfortable rhythm. Dr. Harrison Caldwell finally removed the heavy fiberglass cast, replacing it with a sleek, supportive brace. As Chloe stared at her pale, thin forearm, she felt a profound sense of closure. The bone had knitted back together, stronger at the fracture point than it had been before. It felt like a physical manifestation of her own spirit. During those 6 weeks, Dominic had been a ghost during daylight hours, managing the complex, often violent affairs of the Corvino syndicate. But every evening, without fail, he returned to the manor. They would sit in the library by a roaring fire, sharing quiet conversations over imported wine. He never pushed her, never demanded anything, but his stormy grey eyes tracked her every movement with a fierce, unwavering protectiveness. Chloe had called her mother Barbara, feeding her a carefully constructed lie that Dominic's people had helped fabricate. She was safe, she told her mother, staying at an upscale corporate retreat while she worked on a massive, high-paying design contract. Barbara had been relieved, mentioning in passing that Derek had seemingly vanished from his apartment. Chloe had just smiled into the phone. One crisp Tuesday morning, Chloe walked into the sunlit breakfast room to find Vincent Rossi, Dominic's stoic consigliere, sipping espresso. He didn't say a word, merely tapping a manicured finger against the front page of the morning newspaper, resting on the mahogany table before standing up and leaving the room. Chloe sat down and pulled the paper toward her. The headline dominated the page in bold, black ink. Federal authorities dismantle multi-million-dollar embezzlement ring. Beneath the headline was a photograph of Derek Stanton. He was being escorted out of a federal courthouse by two stern-faced FBI agents, his wrists bound in heavy steel handcuffs. He looked haggard, terrified, and utterly broken. The article detailed how an anonymous tip had led investigators to offshore accounts and shell corporations, effectively ending his life as a free man. He was facing 20 years without the possibility of parole. A profound, breathless weight lifted from Chloe's chest. The nightmare was truly, permanently over. Dominic had delivered exactly what he promised. Absolute, inescapable karma. "I see Vincent delivered the morning news," a deep voice rumbled from the doorway. Chloe looked up to see Dominic leaning against the doorframe. He was dressed in a dark grey suit, his tie loosened, looking unusually exhausted. He walked into the room, pulling a small, black velvet box and a thick manila envelope from his jacket pocket, placing them gently on the table in front of her. "What is this?" Chloe asked, her heart giving a sudden, anxious flutter. "Your arm is healed, Chloe," Dominic said softly, pulling out a chair and sitting across from her. He wouldn't meet her eyes. "The threat of Derek Stanton is neutralized. Sal Marcano's men have been dealt with. You are completely safe." He gestured to the envelope. Inside are the deeds to a penthouse apartment overlooking the harbor. It was purchased under a newly formed, completely clean LLC in your name. There is also a substantial trust fund that will comfortably cover your living expenses and allow you to open your own graphic design studio. The box contains the keys and a new, untraceable phone. Chloe stared at the items, a cold, sinking feeling dropping into her stomach. "You're sending me away. I am giving you your life back," Dominic corrected, his jaw clenching. He finally looked up, his grey eyes flashing with a turbulent mix of sorrow and rigid discipline. "You were dragged into this world by a violent coward. My world is not a place for someone like you, Chloe. It is dark. It is dangerous. I deal in blood and leverage. You belong in the light, designing beautiful things, drinking coffee with your mother on a Sunday. You don't get to decide where I belong," she whispered, her voice trembling, not from fear, but from sudden, fierce indignation. "I have to," Dominic replied, his voice cracking slightly, betraying the iron control he always maintained. "Because if you stay here any longer, I won't be able to let you go. And you deserve better than a man who holds court in basements and destroys lives with a pen stroke." Chloe stood up. The timid, terrified woman who had cowered in a bathroom 6 weeks ago was gone. In her place was a woman forged in the fire of survival, standing in the heart of a mafia stronghold, completely unafraid of the city's most dangerous man. She walked slowly around the table, stopping right beside his chair. Dominic looked up at her, the ruthless syndicate boss, looking suddenly, painfully vulnerable. She reached out with her left hand, her healed hand, and gently cupped his jaw. He closed his eyes, leaning into her palm as if she were the only source of warmth in a freezing world. "Derek was supposed to be a normal, safe man, and he broke my arm because I moved his keys," Chloe said quietly, her thumb tracing the faint shadow of stubble on his cheek. "You are Dominic Corvino. The city whispers your name in the dark. You break bones and ruin empires, and yet you are the most gentle, honorable man I have ever known." Dominic opened his eyes, staring at her with breathless intensity. "I don't want a clean penthouse, Dominic," Chloe told him, her voice steady and absolute. "I don't want to go back to a quiet, mundane life, pretending monsters don't exist. I know they exist. I survived one. And then I fell in love with the man who chased him away in the dark. Dominic's breath hitched. Chloe, you don't know what you're asking for. Once you're truly in, there is no stepping out. I sent the text, she reminded him. A small, genuine smile touching her lips. You told me you were on your way. You kept your promise. Now, I'm making mine. I'm staying. With a low, ragged groan that sounded like a surrender, Dominic stood up, his large hands immediately wrapping around her waist, pulling her flush against his chest. He didn't hesitate anymore. He kissed her, not with the restrained politeness of the past 6 weeks, but with a desperate, all-consuming passion. It was a kiss that tasted of danger, of fierce loyalty, and of an unbreakable bond, forged in the most unlikely of circumstances. Chloe wrapped her arms around his neck, holding him tightly, the last remnants of her fear melting away completely. She had dialed the wrong number in the darkest moment of her life, but as Dominic held her in the safety of his fortress, she knew with absolute certainty that it was exactly the right call. What a wild ride. Chloe accidentally texted a Mafia boss and found the fierce protector she always needed, leaving Derek to face some serious karma behind bars. If you loved this intense story of justice, survival, and unexpected romance, don't forget to smash that like button. Share this video with your friends, and make sure to subscribe to our channel for more thrilling real-life drama stories. Drop a comment below.